flawless. Absolutely flawless. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nathan Colombo, here at the Varsity Center in downtown Carbondale. And three's a charm, I figure. Let's round out this 80th birthday weekend here at the Varsity Center with a reading of different fond memories that I was hoping to work into our telethon yesterday, but after all was said and done, time just didn't allow for. So I'm so appreciative to everyone who out there has commented both on post in the You Know You Once Lived in Carbondale If group, as well as the Carbondale in the 80s and 90s group, the Beer group. We're going to read both comments, collection of comments here and now, but we're going to do it by group, starting off with the You Know You Once Lived in Carbondale If group. So again, to everyone out there who has contributed comments for us to read, so very appreciative of everything that you've said and every memory that you've shared. And beyond that, we'd just like to make one more plea for your donations this weekend to help ensure that there are many more of these memories to be made in the future. So without further ado, let's get to reading some of these stories. The first story is from James Rossiter, and if I butcher these names, I apologize in advance. There are two moments for me, especially as this weekend is the 16th anniversary of my mom's passing. First is standing in line outside with my mom waiting to get in to see Return of the Jedi. And I'll never forget hiding behind the seats during the Dark Crystal, again, seeing it with my mom, when the Garthams first appeared. Especially since now they're one of my favorite fantasy movie creatures of all time. I won't be able to watch the live stream much, so if someone could message me as to if and when my comment is read so I can check it out, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Hope to be able to see some classic films again sooner or later at the Varsity. So, James, definitely tagged you in one of the posts on this one and sent that out to you. Glad for you to be our first story. Thank you for your story, and we hope you get a chance to see this now. Tanya Young writes, when I was 6 years old, our family went to see the movie Mary Poppins with Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke. Oh, of course, now would be the time that I get a phone call. It was the very first movie I ever saw, and I remember the thrill of the grand theater and how exciting it was to actually see a movie. To this day, anytime I see anything about that movie or watch it again, I think the Varsity Theater and how wonderful it was to put such a smile on the face of a child and wonderful memory in my heart. Thank you. And I will say I've not read most of these beforehand, so a lot of this as I'm reading them are going to be just as fresh to me as they are to you. So excited to share these things all together, and hopefully I can keep from having many more interruptions as we go through this feed. Bear with me again as I'm here just kind of double checking all my fun technical things to make sure everything is in place and running smoothly here. It's always the excitement of running the one-person show on the back end. Let's see here. We're all good. We've got reactions. We got everybody excited and in here looking good. All right. Back to it. Susan Kelly writes, in the 1950s, my sister and I used to go to the Varsity on Saturday mornings. Admission was 7-Up bottle caps. And in response to that, Don McConaughey writes, Susan Kelly, I remember digging around in our old garage to find bottle caps. Susan, ! Virginia Vogler Brown writes, I used to save all the Varsity programs from my dates with my husband. I'd circle the dates and write who went with us that night. I still have about 10 of them from the early to mid-60s. Apparently, seats were up to 90 cents by then, skyrocketing from the 25 cents we paid in elementary school. One of my strongest memories, though, is going to see the movie Them in 1954. It was my first horror movie, and my friend Gail and I walked home in the dark, screaming the whole way, seeing giant ants moving in the shadows at every corner. In response to that, Sarah Basinger Schmidt says, Virginia Vogler Brown, I can remember tickets were 25 cents when we were kids. All candy was a nickel, soda 10 cents, and popcorn 10 cents. Wow, those were the days. Roxanne Conley, a former board member here at the Varsity and a wonderful supporter, has a couple stories for us. She writes, short accounting of my experiences at the Varsity. 1, being very young, maybe 4, and going to a movie with my mom. I wanted to sit in the balcony and was told I was not allowed up there. That is when it was segregated and the balcony was black only. I was not told why I could not sit up there, and I am thankful that it has ended. 2, seeing Gone with the Wind on the big screen before the fire and renovation. That movie is so much more impressive on a large screen than on TV. 3, numerous dates in the balcony. I cannot recall the movies. LOL, all in capitalization. 4, being an administrative part of bringing music to the Varsity, Rock the Varsity, Jason Isabel, Swamp Tigers, and more. My son Curtis, shout out Curtis Conley, actually did most of the booking and promotion. 5, finally, the ghost hunt that did not find ghosts, but I am certain ghosts are in there, which is exactly the comment that I want to read while I'm here alone on a Sunday evening. Thanks, Roxanne. Ann Gates Bishop writes, double features on Saturday for 50 cents. Going with my class from U School, Miss Meehan, 4th grade, to see the 10 Commandments, and going with my family to my first movie, To Kill a Mockingbird. Good memories. Cynthia Vogler Weller writes, my now husband and I had our first date at the Varsity, October 15th, 1960. I was a 13-year-old CCHS freshman. He was an almost 16-year-old junior. We saw the House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price. We've now been married for 53 years, and I still remember all the details about our very first date. Avis Frick writes, it must have been in the late 50s. My mom took my sister and I to see Bambi. My sister and I started crying hysterically when Bambi's mom was killed. We could not be comforted, kept crying, and my mom decided we needed to leave. To date, I still have not seen the end of Bambi. And a couple responses underneath that, Avis actually had a follow-up post and said, and in 1969-1970, watching Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with Sarah Basinger and swooning over Robert Redford. We were 16, so, you know. To which Ty Young replied, Avis Frick, I remember going to the Varsity with you, Carrie Given and Marouj Abbas in 5th or 6th grade. That memory just popped up reading your post. We were all so cool and grown up. And as they continued to talk in their comments, they came to a conclusion. They believed that the movie that they saw was A Hard Day's Night. We have Helen Jolly Bosler. My mom and I went to see Gone with the Wind, I think in the 50s. U School had after prom there for at least a couple of years. In 1960, my date, and now husband of 56 years, Larry Bosler, and I went there after prom to see Sandra Dee and Troy Donahue in A Summer Place. I also remember seeing Elvis Presley's first movie, Love Me Tender, there. In 1972, we watched The Godfather in the upstairs balcony. I have so many wonderful memories of the Varsity Theater. Karen Wyatt says, I saw the movie Altered States at the Varsity, and if memory serves, there was a fire in the building that night. Altered States, right, Karen? Woof. Another one from Cynthia Vogler Weller, because it's hard to have just one fond memory here. She says, in high school, early 60s, the Varsity was showing Gone with the Wind. Jimmy Weller and I went to the show with Ron Axe and Jean Mayer's Coates. My mom had told me to come home right after the movie because it was an extra long movie. After the movie, we went parking for a little while. Laugh emoji, smile emoji, something along those lines. When I got home, I got in trouble for being late. My excuse that the movie was so long and had just ended didn't hold water. My younger brother, Bill Vogler, had also been at the movie, and he had been home for an hour. Uh-oh. Tanis R. Westbrook writes, I saw the midnight showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show at the Varsity for the first time in the late 70s. I had no idea what I was in for. And Tanis, when everything gets back to normal, by all means, there will be more opportunities to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show at the Varsity. And for any virgins out there, plenty of activity that I'm sure will be unexpected for the first timers. A friend of mine, Keisha Ladon Lowe, writes, we've had 2 different times where the Varsity came in clutch for us. This is a more modern telling of memories at the Varsity. The first was for my best friend's bridal shower. She loves everything related to movies, and when it was time to plan something unique to honor her, the Varsity was the only option. We were able to set up in the downstairs with food and to open gifts, and then we set up an amazing video montage for all of her favorite movies and shows in the theater upstairs. Every service provided was spectacular and really helped make her day special. If you are ever looking for a unique and completely creative event space, definitely keep them in mind. The Varsity has so much to offer. For the second, I am a cosmetologist and needed a unique location to host a photo shoot for an entry to a national hair and makeup competition. The theme was Music Across the Ages. And my category was vintage. There is no better place in Carbondale or the surrounding areas to get everything you need in one shoot. From the lighting in the dressing rooms, the stage equipment that made the best makeshift background, the theater upstairs, different beautiful lighting spots and entryways hidden throughout the building, you are sure to find something new each time you turn a corner. Nathan, Marshall, and our crew were extremely helpful and vital in making this a photo shoot worthy of a national competition. They go above and beyond for their patrons and help create memories that will truly last a lifetime. It's always hard to stumble into a shout-out that you don't know is coming for yourself. Dean Alcorn Keys writes, I saw Roman Holiday at the Varsity. It was U-School prom, 1962. My date was Warren Hull. Had not thought of that in more than 50-plus years. Linda Thompson chimes in with, as a child, teenager, I saw many movies at the Varsity. After college, SIU, I moved away from Seedale and returned 30 years later while it was closed as an unused building. I will never forget the thrill of seeing the marquee lit once again. I often attend plays and performances there now and enjoy viewing the work of local artists. So delighted to see the variety of functions now held there. Oh, almost missed one. Jessica Bradshaw writes, I remember seeing Titanic and Waterworld there. Complimentary movies. She didn't say that. That's my addition there. And both times heard the train go by. It was such a weird thing to hear a train when you're in the middle of the ocean. I also was lucky enough to be the box office person for the stage company when they were still roving. There we go. Yep, because I can read line by line. And then opened the box office in the Varsity when they were finishing. I could tell you a lot about the reopening weekend. I remember the play was Star Spangled Girl with Rosie Berkman. Joseph Bohr writes, well, I was 7 or 8 years old. For my birthday, my mom sent a bunch of us to a double feature at the Varsity. It was Something Else and Captain Blood with Errol Flynn. I had a nosebleed waiting in line, so they all decided I was Captain Blood. Jessica Bradshaw also writes, I also remember seeing Lord of the Rings there, which is such a weird thing because those films are so long. That is the truth, Jessica. Another shout out that comes my way from Charlie Howe. He says, "Okay, Nathan. I'm 8 years old, and on the weekends, the 7-Up Bottling Company out of St. Louis is sponsoring a morning of cartoons at the Varsity Center. Ticket price? 7-Up bottle caps. Only glass bottles back in those days, along with a 2 or 3 cent refund. So, what does Don Juan Charlie Howe do? He invites the 2 prettiest girls in his 3rd grade class at Brush School to see cartoons. There was even a prize for the young person who brought in the biggest bag of bottle caps. We were savers and recyclers back in those days. And yes, I scored some points with the prettiest girl at Brush School. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark." Then we've got one from Patrick C. Temple writing, "I remember Dick Gregory writing that it had been segregated when he attended SIU. The bad old days. I think the last movie I saw there was Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was taking a break from cleaning up my dissertation with a friend who was helping me with it and preparing for my defense." One we read yesterday from Robbie Stokes right here. "I darn near grew up in the Varsity. It was a heck of a babysitter. The Lukenbachs ran it. I recall them. The son, like the dad, also named Tony, later had a hand in the old Silver Ball Club downstairs from Fat Patty's, and we played there often in our bands. But I've only gotten to actually trod the boards of the Varsity in more recent times. I saw Help, A Hard Day's Night, and the Dave Clark 5 film, Catch Us If You Can, there. ... Space operas, Vincent Price flicks, and lastly, A Mighty Wind. We youngsters would round up Coke bottles on our bikes all Saturday morning in order to trade them in for change for admission to the Varsity Center. Priceless." Karen Stolesley Midden writes, "I saw every Elvis Presley movie that was played there along with the teenage movies as Gidget Goes to Hawaii. The Varsity was the Saturday afternoon place to go as kids." Courtney Kissett writes, "My favorite memory of the Varsity? Question mark. It would have to be either New Year's Eve 2013 with Whistle Pigs and Swamp Tigers, or maybe 1997, senior year in college when a group of us girls went to see the movie Titanic together. After 3 hours of bawling, we hung a right to cheer up with beers at Boobies. Great food, great fun, great times. Right here at Boobies? I don't remember all the jingle, but I think I'm close." Marilyn Keller writes, I'm almost 79, and when we lived on West Grand, I walked to the Varsity, and when we moved to West Oak, we walked there too. Great memories, great friends, great movies." Almost like the Boobies jingle from back in the day. Virginia Wild writes, "Tons of memories, but my favorite was seeing From Hell. I think it was this movie. I remember Johnny Depp with my dad. It was in the little upstairs theater, and we had a lot of issues with stairs, but he was going to make it up there to watch that movie with me. He had a stroke a few months earlier, and we never got to see another theater movie. Still, a great memory." Vanessa Collier writes, "My brother Kenneth Brown took me to see The Planet of the Apes. He still is the coolest big brother ever. I'll never forget that. During the summer, they had movies and popcorn for $0.25. I saw the movies Tammy's in Love and Tammy and the Doctor." And lastly, we have a comment from Melanie Deal. "The first time that my mom dropped me and my friend off to watch a movie without parental supervision was in 1973, or thereabouts. The movie was The Sting. I fell in love with Robert Redford at the ripe old age of 12. And then she had a couple other comments going along underneath there, and the only notes I wrote down for that were the Varsity Grill's fry basket and the balcony. So I can only imagine it used to smell like French fries at just the right time when you needed a snack in the midst of a movie. Checking how we're doing online here. Looking good. All right. Now we're on to the comments from the beer group. Carbondale in the 80s and 90s, starting off with Michael Tao. Summer of 99, the summer of the railroad killer in Southern Illinois. I watched Blair Witch Project at the Varsity, and during the show there was a heavy rainstorm outside that overwhelmed the storm drains and caused the sewers to back up. Instead, inside the theater, a misty fog rose over the floor and made the movie extra creepy. I still think of that night every time I think of Blair Witch Project or the Railroad Killer. Melissa Almaguer writes, 77 to 81, Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight. Blues Brothers, Ordinary People, many others. Such a wide range of movie and social experiences. Summer movies, anything, because we didn't have air conditioning. Wally Hooker, 1978. Animal House was showing at the Varsity. I was in the 8th grade. I was desperate to see this movie. My friends and I had bought tickets for whatever G-rated movie was playing, but instead snuck in to see Animal House. We sat there with our jaws dropped the entire time. Totally lived up to the hype. Brad Webb writes, late 90s-ish, midnight showing of Blue Velvet by David Lynch. Danny Mack writes, my parents saw The Graduate there. I saw Braveheart 28 years later. Mary Teresa writes, I went with a couple of my roommates to an afternoon movie at the Varsity on a very warm day, May 29th, 1982. Must still have the ticket stub. I wish I could remember what movie we saw, but I can't. What I remember is that when we left the theater, we noticed that it had rained a lot and that the sky had an eeriness about it. Soon after walking home, we learned that Marion had been blasted with a huge tornado that damaged a large portion of the town and killed 10 people. We heard absolutely nothing while in the theater, not even the warning sirens. Jessica Gatewood Beatty writes, when I worked there, we would play a game called Broom Toss, where you would throw a broom like a javelin, the farthest wins. Good memory, Jessica. Jeffrey Wheeler writes, I wasn't done reading the novel Jurassic Park, but it was probably summer, and I wanted to see Jurassic Park ASAP. There may have been weed involved. Anyway, I went to the first showing of the day a little early and read the last 40 pages or so in the theater before the movie started. I barely finished before the lights went down. And if you thought the last one was bad, this one, well, it's a little interesting too. Brian Gordon writes, I saw the Doors movie there on LSD. Curtis Winston writes, one of my main formative cinematic experiences was Goodfellas in the balcony. Then Cinema 3. Alone, on an afternoon of blowing off classes. Due to being up all night doing newspaper stuff. Can't watch it again without recalling that experience. Michael Finley writes, watching Amelie with my girl around 2001 and knowing that we were lucky to see a film that was just about perfect. Girl and I are long since divorced, but I still watch that film at least once a year. John Foster writes, was lucky enough to go see Star Wars at the Varsity with my father when I was 5 years old. Pretty sure I fell asleep, but it was an amazing memory that changed my life. Years later, I went to a Rocky Horror Picture Show screening when I was a student on campus in 1990. I guess it speaks to why the Rocky Horror Picture Show is still such a popular activity here at the Varsity. That's great. Vicky Pace Lickus writes, I remember seeing two of the 80s classics there, Return of the Jedi and Purple Rain. Jennifer Kelly writes, I went with my roommate to see the Titanic. I have never walked out of a movie with so many people sniffling. The tears shed in that theater that night, mine included. Courtney Davis Rabinowitz writes, my now husband and I and a bunch of our friends went to the Varsity to see a Saturday morning showing of Down from the Mountain. The movie about the music from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The first song of the movie was performed by the Blind Boys from Alabama, I believe. It was so moving and captivating, the entire audience began clapping when the song finished. And then we all remembered we were watching a movie, not a live performance. Great movie, or great memory there, Courtney. Brian Lonergan writes, dates were uncommon in my time at SIU. Usually met girls at bars or parties, but the only planned out date I can remember in my 5 years at SIU was taking, I'll name her, the very fun and cool blonde, to go see House Party 2 in like 91 or 92 at Varsity. A memory not forgotten. Lisa Bales-Wren writes, I lived across the street when Titanic came out. I went every day for a week. Great times. Andrea Barnaby, we're just going to say K because otherwise I'm not going to be able to pronounce her last name. I went on my first date with my husband there, and my parents went on their first date there. Exclamation point. So wonderful. Chris Martin writes, I worked there summer of 90 to 92. Had a great time that summer. Met some great locals and college friends. We got to preview the new movies before everyone else. After we closed, we would go see midnight movies at the other theater. Great times. Kathy Pate writes, my first year at SIU, me and my Maysmith 13th floor went to watch Purple Rain. Dolores Hurley writes, as a local, making a trip to Carbondale for a movie required a bigger reason. There were movie theaters in many of our communities. When a very handsome young man asked me out to a movie in Carbondale, my expectations went up. We saw Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I didn't realize it was part of a classic series. I ended up underwhelmed because I didn't get it with the movie. The young man ended up with another date. Years later, I got the rest of the story about Mad Max. My apologies, Brian. Stuart Harrison Jr. writes, fall of 88, first semester there. Went and saw U2, Rattle and Hum. Dude that was with us told the rest of us to get a soda. I was like, okay. He pulled out a pint of rum and we made mixed drinks. First time I had ever had a mixed drink in a theater. It felt so rebellious. By the way, the movie was awesome. Susan Collins Plot writes, I saw Purple Rain at the Varsity with my friends from Thompson Point. Jodine Scheller writes, the Varsity Theater is the only theater in which I have ever watched 3 movies in the same day with my roommate Nancy Bean Smith. Christina Leonard Byers writes, our memories are the ones we are making now with our daughter. The movies and plays that have been so greatly enjoyed. We have had the opportunity to bond over prized movies from our youth with her and learn a lot of the history from the plays that we have seen. Thanks for being a true family experience. Well, you're welcome, Christina. Thank you. Rebecca Amble Craig writes, we sublet right behind the theater on University the summer of 90, I think. Going to the movies to beat the heat was a good plan to help ease the hangover. I remember watching Pretty Woman there. I'm still haunted from renting videos at the adjacent movie store. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was right by. Checkout, and I'd get that song stuck in my head for days at a time. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang loves you too. Tree Song writes, I watched The Matrix in the Balcony Theater at the Varsity during its original run. It was the first time I had gone to a movie alone. It was liberating. And he's been a superhero ever since. Katie McGuire Koppel writes, LOL, our first date, Jeff Colmel. We saw I Love You to Death. Thankful for college friendships that stand the test of time 30 years later. Sarah Schmidt writes, sat in the first row for Twister. It was awesome. Patty Vaught Davis writes, I saw the Blair Witch Project and the theater was packed. After the movie ended, everyone was piling out and multiple people were complaining of nausea. A guy I went to school with tossed his cookies all over the lobby. We found out afterwards that the film's purposeful, shaky camera was responsible for giving lots of people motion sickness. Considering I am easily car sick, I was extremely thankful I had spent most of the movie with my eyes closed due to being scared out of my wits. And Alicia Juarez Carrianis replies, Patty Vaught Davis, OMG. I was there for BWP as well, 1999, with my parents who were down from Chicago visiting. Didn't sleep well for days! Exclamation point, exclamation point. Teresa Stokes McCarthy writes, sneaking in when I was 12 to watch The Exorcist with my older sister and her friends. Big mistake. Scariest movie ever. Kimberly Olsom writes, that time Holly Loy, who worked at the Varsity, and I decided to skip class and spend all day watching movies. We bounced between the Varsity and the theater on the other side of town in the Eastgate Shopping Center. I can't remember what we saw that day, but all of my friends and I, we got a lot of great inside jokes from all the movies we saw there. Brian Duckworth writes, my roommate was obsessed with Flashdance. He dragged me along on one of his many viewings. I was suspicious, but it was pretty good. Only time I remember going. Shannon Biggs Anderson writes, 2 comments. First, I grew up in Carbondale watching many movies there. Star Wars, The Outsiders, Dirty Dancing, too many to list. Her other comment, I worked there in 1998. Great friends. We played Trivial Pursuit in between movies. We used to double butter the popcorn. Now I only like the yellow pieces. Kimberly Michelle writes, my most recent visit was a comedian this year just prior to COVID-19. We saw him on March 5th and he was hysterical. It was my birthday and we all had a ball that night. Well, Kimberly, thank you. I don't remember which comedian I had booked for. Oh, I do. That was Brian. Brian is an absolutely amazing comedian, and I'm so glad you got to enjoy his show just before COVID-19 restrictions went into place. Ted Popov writes, saw Fargo there, 2010 too. It was our largest screen in town. They always worked with our SIU Cinema and Photography School. Much love. They also were one of the pioneers of hanging the tags underneath the VHS cassettes in their rental room. Larry Turinsky, fall of 1984 or spring of 85, I watched the midnight movie showing of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Walked out of the theater around 2:45 a.m. That was a long movie. Curtis Kessinger writes, I don't recall the movies playing, but I do remember the numerous beer cans being opened and cans rolling down the floor under the seats. Not sure you can use that in your telethon. Well, Curtis, I can tell you, we could absolutely use that in our telethon. So thanks for your story, man. Nearing the end here, we have Timothy Smith. I have Dose. That's 2 for you non-Los Angelinos. Kippy Kirk runs by Tom on Cherry Street and says, we're buying 40s and are watching the 5 o'clock showing of Showgirls. The bottles inevitably got knocked over when empty, then rolled down the incline. Second, Chris J. says, Smith, you're coming to watch Kids, Harmony Korine. Hearing my friends yell, I have no legs, repeatedly for 2 years every time they were inebriated still rings through my head. Ashley saying, shut up, you do have legs, just stand up, still makes me laugh when I think of it. Chiara Robinson writes, I worked at Saluki Cinema in the 90s. A few of us would work at the Varsity when they were short-handed or for a premiere. My brother was also assistant manager there. My fave memory was a late-night preview of Batman Returns. We would watch the movies first before showing in the public. A cooler of beer, free popcorn. It was awesome. Anywho, that was the biggest showing of Carasote's employees. Awesome. It was probably the movie. Could have been the cooler of beer. And our last story for the evening comes from Sarah Bross Novak. She writes, my grandfather ran the projector during the weekend matinees while working in the AV department on campus during the 1950s. My mom used to say she loved going there in the summer with the air conditioning and all the popcorn she could eat. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for your memories. I'm so appreciative. Everyone here at the Varsity is so appreciative. And I would say that everyone that is part of our community now and part of our community around the world are just as appreciative themselves to have heard your stories tonight. I hope to hear more of them. We hope to make more of them. And that's why we would ask for your support at thevarsitycenter.org. Whatever you can do to help make more memories for 80 years to come. Thank you so much, folks. Have a great night.